Hey guys, Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. Although it's midsummer, I'm already starting to plan some of my hunts for the fall. And one of the first things that I think about is, what kind of hunt is this going to be? When is it? Where is it? What animals am I chasing? And what style of hunting do I want to do? You know, I often gravitate towards the idea of a backcountry, backpack style hunt. Even before I began hunting regularly, I had done a lot of backpacking, and the idea of hiking in away from roads, finding untouched wilderness, and having some solitude all sounds like an ideal scenario for hunting. But then I start to think through the logistics. How much time do I have? How far can I pack an animal out? And where am I going to get water? Am I hunting solo or with a group of people? And in my experience, this often leads to me choosing a different style of hunt, specifically a hunt based out of my vehicle. So today I want to talk about this. What are the differences between backpack hunting and car camp hunting, for lack of a better term? And when would you choose one over the other? I was going to use the terms backcountry and front country, but it got too confusing. So this is what we're going with. Pretty much, are you based out of your vehicle, or is camp on your back? Before we get into it, please take a moment to hit that follow button on whatever platform you're listening on. And if you'd be so kind, leave a 5-star review or share an episode with a friend. Sharing episodes really helps the podcast grow, and in turn, it will help more people get outside and into hunting, which is the entire goal of Persistence Outdoors. So thanks so much for your support, and let's talk about our first logistics problem: packing in and out. The pack out is one of the first things that gets me when I'm considering whether I want to do a backpack style hunt or car camp instead. And that's because it's a significant amount of weight on your back. It's likely a long distance, depending how far in you've hiked. And you need to do that all in the amount of time that you're allotted. Okay, so when we break this down, think about the weight on your back. If you are backpacking in, that means you already have maybe 45 pounds on your back, maybe more, just depending on what gear you have. And when you come out, you have to get that gear out some way, right? So if you kill an animal and you add 100 pounds of meat to your, let's say, 50-pound pack, including your rifle and such, now it's a really heavy backpack. You know, that's 150 pounds, if not more, that you have to pack out of there. And likely you're going to split that up into multiple trips. So that's a huge issue, because basically anything you pack in, you have to pack out. And it makes it a lot easier to instead not bring all your camping gear with you and have a lighter backpack, and then you might be able to pack out that 100 pounds of meat in one trip instead of making it a few trips. And this all depends on your personal fitness level, of course. Some people are going to be able to pack out that 150 pounds in one trip, but you're going to have to figure out something that works for you. And often backpacking in can be tricky. Another thing is the distance and kind of the time, right? If you walk super far in, you're going to have to walk super far out. And let's say you are hunting just for 2 days. You're just hunting on a weekend, and you have Saturday and Sunday to hunt, and then you've got to be to work on Monday, right? Well, if you're super far in and you've got to make at least 2 trips to get out, and you've got a heavy load, it's going to take you a long time to get all the way out. And at some point, even if you could physically pack the animal out, you might not have enough time. And this is one thing I run into all the time. No pun intended. But I might be able to care for the meat long enough and I might physically be able to pack the animal out. But because of other commitments that I have, I might just not have time to go in as far as I want. So that's an interesting dynamic that you have when you're trying to do a backpack hunt. And it often makes it easier to actually just hike in even a long distance with an empty pack instead of bringing camp with you. When you think about time, you might also think about the weather. On certain hunts, you can leave your animal out in cold weather for 2 weeks if it's the right conditions. But on other hunts, say an early September elk hunt when it's still super warm, you have to get that animal out of there quickly. And so if you have already hiked in 5 miles and then you're hunting 5 miles further, well, even if you get your meat back to camp, you're not going to be able to take care of it. It might spoil in that very, very warm weather. So you have to think about this when you're planning what style of hunting you're going to do. Another big difference between backpack hunting and hunting based out of your vehicle is the mobility involved. When you have a vehicle, you could drive to a whole new unit if you wanted to. Say you went out for a hunt and the whole morning you didn't find any animal, you weren't finding sign. Well, you could back out and be in a completely different time zone by the end of the day if you wanted to. And that can be really helpful because you can cover lots of ground. You can also drive places and glass from the car. And I'm not saying this is the best strategy, but you can just cover more ground than you could possibly cover on foot, and you can get more places, and that can be really helpful for you zeroing in on where the animals are. Now, having a vehicle can be a negative thing because I've experienced sometimes when I have a vehicle, I feel less inclined to get out of the car. And so that's not a great thing when you're trying to kill animals that don't live on the roads, essentially. And I've also noticed that sometimes I might zip out of a spot without giving it the time it deserves. So I know elk are in an area, I'm just not finding them. And maybe I start thinking about another spot that's across the unit. And I think I'm really confident in that spot. I'm going to go. But really what I needed to do was just spend some more time in the area that I'm in and do some more glassing or walk some ridges, whatever it is. So there's pros and cons of having a vehicle, right? Same with backpacking. The great thing about backpacking is that you can kind of go anywhere you want on foot, right? You have your backpack and it's got your camp. And if you're hunting elk, for example, maybe you find a herd and you just want to camp sort of in the vicinity of where you found those elk. Great, you can do that. You can drop camp right then and there. Now, one downside of backpacking is that you're kind of committed once you get in. It takes a lot of effort to pack your camp in, and when you get to the place you want to hunt and you find out there's no animals there, it can be hard mentally to just be like, nope, we're out. We're going somewhere else, because that means you have to pack your camp all the way back. And you've just already invested a lot into your backpacking spot. So there's pros and cons to both. And you want to think about what kind of mobility is going to best benefit you for the area and the animals that you're hunting. Here's a good one. Gear. How do your gear needs differ when you're backpack hunting or car camping? Well, when you're backpack hunting, you're going to need more specialized gear. And that's because you're going to have everything in your backpack and you want things to be lightweight and preferably smaller. Whereas if you're car camping, it's easy to bring whatever gear you have. You can just throw it in the back of the car and you don't have to worry about hoofing it anywhere. So backpack hunting could end up being a little bit more expensive. You might buy a lightweight sleeping bag or a lightweight stove. You might want a lightweight tent. And these things are all going to add up. Whereas if you've got your car, you don't necessarily need to use anything different than maybe what you already have. Maybe you already have a propane stove, or maybe you have a sleeping bag and you bring an air mattress or something. You've got things that you can kind of use for your camping, and they're just not as specialized. Another thing about car camping is that you can bring way more gear. So there's all sorts of things that I'm going to leave at home if I'm backpack hunting and backpack camping. But if I have my vehicle, I might just throw it in there because I think, what if? What if I needed to cut down a tree to make a meat pole? Well, throw in the axe. Now, this can bite you for sure. And I've realized it's becoming a bad habit of mine where I can overpack quickly. And that can actually not be as fun, especially when you're in a week-long hunting trip and in the middle of the week, you're just digging through stuff in your car. So I've had to scale back sometimes, and you might need to watch out for that. But generally, hunting out of your vehicle is just going to be easier and require less specialized equipment than hunting out of your backpack. What about time spent hunting? This is something that's really challenging for me, and let me explain. So when you're hunting, oftentimes you are targeting those early mornings and evenings. And so you have to get out and be in position before the sun comes up, and often you have to be out glassing as the sun goes down or sitting in your stand as the sun goes down. And these are the most productive times of day to find animals. Well, if you're car camping and you need to get in pretty far to where you think the animals are going to be or to your glassing point, you're going to have to get up real early and hike a long ways in the dark. And that's the same for the evenings. You're going to have to hike out a long ways in the dark. And then let's say you do this 5 to 10 days in a row. Well, at some point, you may be cutting into the time that you have to sleep and recover as well. So if you're getting up 2 hours before sunrise, and then you're getting back 2 hours after sunrise, and then once you get back to camp, you're making some food, and then you go to sleep, and then you just do it again and again and again, it can really wear you down. So with this in mind, backpack hunting actually has an advantage because you can go camp closer to where you want to be in the morning. And this could help you hike fewer miles. It could help you get to bed a little bit sooner. Now, you have to weigh that with all the other things that you have to do when you're backpack hunting that you might not have to do if you were camping from your car. So maybe going to get water or cooking on a smaller stove, things like that. But if you think about it strategically, you may be able to make it work for you a little bit better than having to hike in a long ways every day. One thing I think about a lot when I'm considering a backpack hunt versus a car camping hunt is other people. And oftentimes I think about backpack hunting as a way to get away from other people and to find some untouched wilderness where there's going to be more animals and less pressure. And it's kind of an idealistic view in my head of what a backpack hunt could be like. And I've also experienced hunting not so far from roads where everybody else is hunting. So there is something to the idea of wanting to get away from other people. But you always have to factor in all that weight on your back. It's going to slow you down, and you may decide not to hike as far because you know you have to pack all that gear out. And so sometimes when I'm backpack hunting, I actually go not as far as I might when I'm camping out of my vehicle because I have all that weight on my back and it's either slowing me down or I just need to know logistically that I can get it all back in time for me to work on Monday, for example. So sometimes the advantages and the disadvantages kind of cancel each other out. And at some point, you're just looking at a different type of hunt rather than one that's better than the other. Kind of along with getting away from people is the idea of finding better animal densities. Again, it's that idea that once we get deep into the backcountry, there are magically going to be more animals. And this can be the case for sure, just depending on where you are and what type of animals you're hunting, but it's not always the case. One interesting thing about human development is that animals tend to like it. Animals tend to like places where humans have cut a lot of trees. So clear cuts for power lines or timber sale areas. And they like agricultural food sources. And they might even like old roads that make it easier to travel. So all that human disruption to a degree can actually make for some really good hunting. And if you instead decide to go out into the forest, say in a place like my home state of Washington, where you can go out and just find giant, just insane tracts of timber, and it's all sort of the same homogeneous forest, it's not broken up very much, and a lot of that food and energy is captured in the tree cover, the canopy, you could get out into some of these places and there just not be a very high density of animals. Whereas if you hunted a little bit closer into human development, you could find much higher densities of animals living in these edge habitats. And so just depending on the backcountry that you're going into, just being away from people and just being deeper in, quote unquote, doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to encounter higher densities of animals. In fact, for some animals, it's the opposite. So that's something to keep in mind when you're weighing your options. Another logistics issue I think about when it comes to car camp hunting versus backpack hunting is meat care. And I touched on this a little bit earlier, but basically with a car, with a vehicle, you can have coolers in that vehicle. And even if you don't have coolers in your vehicle, you can have access to ice within a few hours of driving. Now, if you've backpacked in a long ways and you've set up camp, if you kill an animal and you can't get it all the way back to your truck, you're going to have to find ways to care for it in the field and keep it cool in the field. And this definitely isn't impossible, and depending on the temperatures, it may be very easy to do, but it's something you have to think about. If you're backpack hunting and the temperatures are warmer, there's a chance that you're going to have to hike all the way back to your truck regardless of where you've camped, so you can put that meat on ice. So it's not to say that you can't care for meat successfully on a backpack hunt. Many people do it. It's just to say that you need to have a plan to get that meat out successfully, and it may look a lot different depending on what style of hunting you're doing. All right, our next topic is cell service. In places where you're more likely to backpack hunt, you're less likely to have cell service. And this can be really nice if you're trying to get away from people and enjoy the outdoors. But it can also be a huge downside in the case of an emergency. If you don't have cell service, you can't call anybody to help you. And if you've backpacked in, chances are you're already hours away from a road. You might address this problem by getting a GPS communicator, something like an InReach by Garmin or a Zaleo. And these both give you satellite communication capabilities and then also an SOS button that you can press if you're in real bad trouble. But those can be expensive. And honestly, I've gone into a lot of places without cell service and I don't have one of those, largely because it's expensive and they charge a monthly fee. And you just have to be more careful and more prepared if you are going into the backcountry. Now, if you're hunting from your vehicle, there's just more likely to be cell service because if you're in a roaded area, you're more likely to have cell service. And this isn't always the case. You can definitely get into places that don't have cell service in your vehicle, but even being close to a road is much more safe than being far away from one because you can either get back to your car or if you get lost, you can get to a road and then possibly be picked up. There's just so many advantages of being closer to man-made roads and civilization. Another thing cell service is really helpful for is when you need help packing an animal out. Say you've killed a big elk, but you're in an area that has cell service. It's real easy to call a couple buddies to help you pack out that animal. And also, it's nice to be able to call people and share intel. So maybe you're hunting in one part of the unit and someone else is hunting somewhere else. You can call each other and be like, hey, has it been good hunting over there? And they might say yes or no, but it's just so much easier when you can stay connected with other people, as you likely know just from living in society, right? Be careful with this. In some states, you're not allowed to use cell phones to aid in hunting, and there's going to be different specific regulations around that. So if you were using a cell phone to help someone stalk an animal, that could be illegal. Like you're watching where they're stalking and then you're giving directions on the cell phone. That could be illegal. So be careful with that. But all of that to say, it's easier to hunt and exist when you're connected to other people. That's not to discourage you from going into the backcountry. In fact, I encourage it. I think it's really interesting and a great adventure, but it's just another layer. It's just another logistical challenge that you have to account for before you head out. So those are some of the big things to think about when you're choosing what style of hunt to go on. And it kind of leaves the question, well, which one should I choose? Maybe you already know, but let's just run through some of the reasons why you might choose one over the other. So car camping in general is going to be less dangerous. You have less specialized gear. You can bring more gear with you. You can shelter from bad weather in the car if you want to. It's kind of lower stakes all around. And in some ways, it's much easier than backpack hunting. So if you're not as experienced, you may want to start with a car camping hunt instead of a backpacking style hunt where you're kind of jumping in the deep end. You also might choose a vehicle-based hunt when there's plenty of road access. In the place that I live right now, I always think about going on a backpacking style hunt, but the reality is that most of the areas I hunt are just covered in roads, old logging roads and recreational roads. And sometimes it's frustrating because I'm like, oh, I need to find a place I can go in deep. And then I look at my unit and there's not many places where you can go in deep without hitting another road. So in a way, I would just be wasting my time by putting camp on my back and trying to hike somewhere because I could drive there and get there so much quicker. For me, if I'm solo hunting for big animals, I'm likely going to choose a vehicle-based hunt because I know I can only hike in so far before I am risking not being able to get that animal out or get that animal out in time. So a good example is elk hunting. If I'm hunting solo, if I went in 5 miles and killed a big elk, and then I need to do 4 trips out, and let's say I'm in some really nasty deadfall terrain, that's going to be a significant physical challenge. It's going to take a lot of time. There's a significant risk for injury, and I don't know if I could do that successfully, meaning not injuring myself and taking care of all the meat properly. So often when I'm solo hunting, I'm setting some sort of limit for myself of how far I can go away from the car, based on my physical capability and the terrain. And often it wouldn't really make sense for me to backpack in when I already know that I'm going to have to make multiple trips out with very heavy loads. Now, on the other hand, why might you choose a backpack style hunt? Well, maybe the place you're hunting in doesn't have a lot of road access. And so to get to the places where the animals are, you actually have to backpack further in. There's just not really any other options. So that's one reason. Now, you might just go on a backpack style hunt because you really enjoy the solitude and the adventure and the ruggedness. And sometimes when I'm deciding to go backpacking, sometimes I'm letting go of the outcomes of the hunt a little bit. I have to be okay with the fact that I could get into an area that just isn't holding the animals that I want, and I could strike out. And you're kind of there to enjoy the process a little bit more than when you're car camping and hunting with a vehicle, where if you don't find animals, you can just go somewhere else. You could also go backpack hunting if you're hunting for smaller animals. Not everybody can pull off a solo backpack style elk hunt, but a lot of people could probably do a solo backpack style mule deer hunt because mule deer just weigh so much less. You're going to be able to pack them out in fewer trips, and it's going to take you less time overall. So I wouldn't have a problem going out on a backpack hunt for mule deer or whitetail deer or even bears. Bears are tricky because they can get really big, but maybe bears. Whereas for those bigger animals, you could really struggle. And then finally, like I mentioned before, if you have a group of people, you can make the pack out much easier. And so if you've got 4 guys hunting, for example, and you kill 1 deer, you can divide that up pretty easily and you'll still be able to hike out with camp on your back. One thing I want to recommend before we move on is that if you're interested in backpack hunting, go on a backpacking trip that's not a hunting trip. Just go backpacking in the summer and kind of feel it out and start getting comfortable just out in the wilderness and by yourself and with the different rhythms of getting water and cooking and setting up camp, maybe setting up a bear bag. Do all those things without having your rifle and the extra weight and thinking about the logistics of getting an animal out from where you kill it, and start to get comfortable living out of a backpack. It's super fun, and it will set a foundation that you can build upon when you decide to go on a backpack hunt. There is a third option, a third style that we haven't talked about so far, and that is a mix of backpack hunting and car camp hunting. And many of my hunts have turned into this recently. I like the minimalist style of backpack hunting, and I like to be able to go where I want and to be able to spend a night in the woods if I want to. But I also like the mobility of having my vehicle. So some people call this spiking out, where you're hunting based from your vehicle, but you realize you really want to be spending the night 3 miles north. And so you put camp on your back, head 3 miles north, and then wake up and hunt in that area. And it's a really effective way of just being able to do pretty much whatever you want. You get the best of both worlds. Now, I've also planned backpack hunts that kind of turned into car camping. So 2 spring bear seasons ago, I was with my dad and one of my brothers, and we drove up to the place where we were going to start our backpacking hunt. And we actually spotted a bear near where we had parked. So we just stayed there, and we were watching that bear, and we stayed the night in that same area next to our car instead of backpacking anywhere because we were there to kill bears. So we just made the best decision that we could in that scenario. All right, guys. Well, I hope this podcast has been helpful for you. And I'm curious to know, what style of hunting do you prefer? Do you enjoy the convenience and mobility of hunting from your vehicle? Or do you prefer to get away from people, even if that means more trips on the way out? Drop a comment on Spotify or YouTube, or shoot me an email at persistenceoutdoors2022@gmail.com. I'd love to hear what you guys think. With that, I will wrap this up. Have a great week, and I will catch you on the next one.